Hello everyone, welcome back to Hit the Apex. I'm Charlie and today we have another video. This time we are reviewing round 16 of the 2023 season where we were at the Marina Bay Street Circuit in Marina Bay in Singapore for the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix. Before we get going, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel, Hit the Apex, the F1 channel, and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. It was a normal weekend this weekend with practice 1, practice 2, and practice 3, qualifying and the race. And of course, we will start in practice 1, where Leclerc headed Sainz as Ferrari set the pace in opening practice session at the Singapore Grand Prix. Ferrari continue their fine form from their home race in Monza as Charles Leclerc led a Scuderia 1-2 in the opening practice session in Singapore. Leclerc set the pace narrowly ahead of teammate Carlos Sainz, with championship leader Max Verstappen in third. With the European portion of the season now complete, the drivers arrived at Marina Bay greeted by intense heat, with air temperatures at 32 degrees Celsius as they look to find their feet in the fast-paced street circuit. While many drivers opted to bolt on the hard tyres to start proceedings, a few strapped on a set of mediums, and it was one of those medium tyre runners in Lando Norris, sporting a new stealth mode livery and a whole host of new upgrades on his McLaren that set the pace after the first 30 minutes of action. The drivers then made the switch to the soft tyres, but as they prepared to set some fast times, yellow flags were briefly waved as a lizard made its way across the track in the second sector, much to Verstappen's amusement. And even though more lizards would disrupt proceedings, Leclerc was able to go fastest with a time of 1 minute 33.35 seconds to lead Sainz by just 0.078 seconds, as Ferrari showed a good turn of pace as preparations begun ahead of this weekend's action. Verstappen wound up third as he looks to get his first win in Singapore this weekend, while Norris impressed in his newly upgraded car to finish fourth for McLaren ahead of the Mercedes pair of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Last year's winner Sergio Perez was seventh ahead of two-time Singapore Grand Prix winner Fernando Alonso, who was eighth for Aston Martin ahead of the AlphaTauri of Yuki Tsunoda and his former Alpine teammate Esteban Ocon in 10th. Aston Martin's Lance Stroll was 11th ahead of the Alpine of Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon, who along with teammate Logan Sargent in sporting a new fan-designed livery on his Williams this week. Valtteri Bottas was 14th for Alfa Romeo ahead of the lead Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Liam Lawson continued to deputise for Daniel Ricciardo, who was on the AlphaTauri pit wall watching on as the Kiwi went 16th ahead of Nico Hülkenberg and Zhou Guanyu, fresh from agreeing his new contract extension with Alfa Romeo. Oscar Piastri will have to wait till Japan next week to have full upgrades, like his teammate Norris was 19th for McLaren ahead of his fellow rookie Sargent, who was at the bottom of the field. With the weekend's first on-track outing at Marina Bay now in the books, the drivers will now chew over the data ahead of second practice under the lights later on Friday at 9 p.m. local time. And we will move to that session then, where Sainz sealed Ferrari Friday clean sweep as he led Leclerc in second Singapore practice. It was a Ferrari clean sweep on the opening day of running in Singapore as Carlos Sainz led the way in second practice at Marina Bay, narrowly topping the timesheets ahead of his teammate Charles Leclerc and rival George Russell. The drivers got their first feel for the track in FP1, but with the sun having set and the lights turned on, they returned for second practice to be greeted by much more representative conditions to what they will face in qualifying and in Sunday's race. As seen in FP1, there was a mix of tyre compounds to start the session, but on this occasion, more drivers strapped on a set of medium tyres compared to the hards, with the teams looking to gather as much data as possible in these conditions. But one driver who was unable to do as much learning as he would have liked under the lights was Alex Albon. The Thai racer complained of a loss of power and engine problems, forcing Williams to pit the FW45 to assess the issue. The drivers then ducked into the pits after 20 minutes, with Leclerc, like he did in FP1, setting the pace. The Monegasque completed a lap of 1 minute 32.974 seconds on the medium tyres to lead teammate Carlos Sainz by 0.239 seconds as Ferrari continued to impress. The drivers then made their way out onto the track with a brand new set of soft tyres as they prepared for some qualifying simulation runs. However, there would be no Albon as the camera panned to him getting out of his car, with his Williams mechanics left with a big job overnight to get his car ready for Saturday. And in the intra-team battle, it was Sainz who came out on top as the Spaniard set a time of 1 minute 32.12 seconds to lead Leclerc by just 0.018 seconds. Russell rounded out the top three for Mercedes, finishing just over 2/10 off Sainz's pace. Fernando Alonso wound up fourth for Aston Martin ahead of his fellow multiple-time winner in Singapore, Lewis Hamilton. Lando Norris continued to put his upgraded MCL 60 through its pace as he finished sixth. It wasn't the easiest of days for Red Bull, with Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen in 7th and 8th, while the former was heard complaining of braking issues. The latter was seen slamming his fist against the steering wheel in frustration after his flying lap. It was a much improved showing from Haas as Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg finished in 9th and 11th, respectively, with the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas sandwiched between the pair in P10. Liam Lawson was the lead AlphaTauri as he set the 12th fastest time, finishing ahead of Alpine's Esteban Ocon, Aston Martin's Lance Stroll, and his fellow rookie Oscar Piastri, who wound up 15th for McLaren. Lawson's teammate Yuki Tsunoda was 16th, ahead of the Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu and the other Alpine of Pierre Gasly, as the Williams pair of Logan Sargent and Albon brought up the rear of the field. That brings an end to the first day of running here in Singapore, and at 5:30 local time tomorrow on the Saturday, FP3 got underway as the drivers readied themselves for what is set to be an exciting Grand Prix weekend. And in FP3, Sainz narrowly led Russell and Norris in action-packed final practice session in Singapore. Ferrari make it a clean sweep in all practice sessions as Carlos Sainz sets the pace in a busy FP3, narrowly leading rivals George Russell and Lando Norris as the teams put the finishing touches on their preparations ahead of qualifying. After a busy first day where the drivers got to grips with the Marina Bay conditions, they returned for third practice looking to finalise their setups ahead of qualifying. However, with rain having hit the track earlier in the day, plenty of the rubber laid down yesterday had been wiped away. With FP3 held in an unrepresentative condition to what the drivers will face in qualifying and in the race, plenty opted to stay back in the garage to begin the day despite the green light being switched on. The mediums were the main tyre of choice to start the day, but we saw a few bolts on the softs straight away. Two of those drivers on the softs were George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, as the former set the early pace with a time of 1 minute 32.883 seconds to lead the 7-time world champion by 0.222 seconds. As temperatures started to drop, the conditions began to become more representative to what the drivers will face in qualifying. This meant the drivers bolted on a set of softs for some qualifying simulation runs. And once again, it was Sainz who proved to be the fastest of the 20 drivers on track, with the Spaniard setting the eye-catching time of 1 minute 32.065 seconds to lead Russell in second by 0.069 seconds. Norris continued to turn the track in his upgraded MCL 60, and after briefly going fastest, he wound up third for McLaren. And after a difficult first day, and despite struggling with of his upshift for much of the session, Max Verstappen ended up fourth for Red Bull. Charles Leclerc looked set to go quickest after setting the fastest first sector, but a mistake in the second sector forced him to settle for fifth ahead of Hamilton in the Mercedes and Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. Like his Red Bull teammate Verstappen, Sergio Perez also struggled with his own issues in FP3 but wound up eighth ahead of the Haas and Nico Hülkenberg, who continues to impress, while Yuki Tsunoda rounded out the top 10 for AlphaTauri. The second Haas of Kevin Magnussen was 11th ahead of Alpine's Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly in 12th and 15th respectively. Sandwiched between the French duo were the Aston Martins of Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll. Liam Lawson survived the spin at turn 2 to go 16th under the watchful eye of Daniel Ricciardo on the AlphaTauri pit wall, while Alex Albon recovered from his engine issues in FP2 to finish 17th for Williams. Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu were 18th and 19th for Alfa Romeo, while Logan Sargent brought up the rear of the field. With all three practices in Singapore complete, attention now turns to qualifying under the lights as the drivers ready themselves to hit the Marina Bay track at 9 p.m. local time. So we will move to qualifying then, where Sainz pips Russell and Leclerc in ultra-tight qualifying battle in Singapore after shock double Q2 exit for Red Bull. Carlos Sainz made good on the promise shown by Ferrari all weekend to take a dramatic pole in Singapore. Already on provisional pole, the Spaniard improved on his final run to narrowly beat rival George Russell and teammate Charles Leclerc to seal a P1 start. It was a frantic session, one that will see several drivers investigated after impeding after qualifying, and one that was red flagged after Lance Stroll's hefty crash in the final stages of Q1. But Sainz stayed out of trouble and continued to set the pace with a rapid final sector, seeing him improve on his provisional pole lap by over 2 tenths, with a time of 1 minute 30.984 seconds, good enough to take his second consecutive P1 start. In second was Russell, as he narrowly missed out on pole by just 0.072 seconds. A frustrated Leclerc qualified third for Ferrari ahead of the McLaren of Lando Norris in fourth, the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton in fifth, and the Haas of Kevin Magnussen in sixth. Fernando Alonso was seventh for Aston Martin, while Esteban Ocon impressed for Alpine to take eighth, ahead of the other Haas of Nico Hülkenberg, with the AlphaTauri of Liam Lawson, who made it into Q3 for the first time in his short F1 career, rounding out the top 10. Lawson's place in Q3 came at the expense of a Red Bull, with Max Verstappen a surprise victim at the Q2 hurdle. The Dutch driver qualified 11th and was less than pleased with his car's performance, while his teammate Sergio Perez also found himself knocked out in 13th. Sandwiched between the Red Bull pairing was Alpine's Pierre Gasly in 12th, while Alex Albon was down in 14th for Williams, with Yuki Tsunoda in 15th after failing to set a time for AlphaTauri in Q2. Due to Stroll's crash at the end of Q1, several drivers were unable to complete their final laps, but the unlucky few to be knocked out early included the Alfa Romeo of Valtteri Bottas in 16th, as well as the McLaren of Oscar Piastri, who was right behind Stroll when he crashed down in 17th. Logan Sargent went another race unable to out-qualify his Williams teammate Albon, as the rookie ended up 18th ahead of the second Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu, as Stroll brought up the rear of the field. So as it happened then in Q1, Tsunoda led the way as Stroll's crash leaves a mixed up order. With temperatures having come down and with the lights turned on, the stage was set for what was sure to be an exciting hour of qualifying. It had been a Ferrari-dominated weekend so far as they topped each practice session, but could they convert that into pole? Before that battle for pole could commence, 18 minutes were put on the stopwatch and the green light was switched on as Q1 got going. It was Leclerc who set the the early pace with a time of 1 minute 32.523 seconds, leading Norris by just 0.033 seconds. But then came the Mercedes duo with Russell and Hamilton after leaving the pit lane later than their rivals. Russell went straight to the top of the timesheets while Hamilton tucked himself in between the Red Bulls of Perez and Verstappen in fifth. While that was happening, Stroll was left frustrated by Sargent as he complained over the radio of being impeded by the Williams driver, an incident that would be investigated by the stewards after qualifying. With 6 minutes left on the clock, a host of purple and green sectors followed, with Sainz going fastest with a time of 1 minute 32.339 seconds, leading second place Verstappen by 0.059 seconds. Leclerc was third ahead of Russell, Norris, Perez, Alonso, Hamilton, Gasly and Lawson. With 2 minutes left on the clock, the drivers came back out of the pit lane with Stroll down in 16th, ahead of Sargent, Albon, Bottas and Zhou. A few drivers were then told that the track was ramping up, with lap times expected to drop significantly. But as the checkered flag came out, the red flags were waved, as on his final lap, Stroll looked to have carried too much speed into the final corner, with a curb launching him briefly into the air and then into the barrier. Thankfully, while his car was heavily damaged, Stroll was able to come onto the radio to say he was okay as he jumped out of the AMR 23. But with several drivers behind him unable to set a time, that left a mixed up order as Tsunoda went through fastest ahead of Perez. The rest of the top five was made up of Hülkenberg, Lawson and Magnussen, and they were followed by Russell, Sainz, Ocon and Verstappen. Leclerc went through 10 fastest ahead of Gasly, Norris, Alonso and Hamilton, while Albon recovered from his engine issues on Friday to squeeze through to the second phase of qualifying. So knocked out in Q1 was Bottas, Piastri, Sargent, Zhou and Stroll. And then in Q2, there was a surprise as Verstappen and Perez had knocked out as Sainz led the way. With the track being cleared and the barrier at the final corner being fixed, there was a lengthy delay to the start of Q2. However, there was still plenty of action, with Verstappen amongst a group of drivers set to be investigated after qualifying for impeding during Q1. Replay showed the Dutch driver stopping at the pit exit before the final runs in Q1, leaving plenty of his rivals, including Leclerc and Russell, less than impressed, but that was all put to the back of their minds as the light was turned green to start Q2. After the first set of laps, it was Russell who continued to show a great turn of pace in his W14, going fastest. The Mercedes driver was 0.092 seconds ahead of his nearest challenger Alonso, with Sainz in third, Norris ahead of Hamilton, Leclerc, Magnussen, Ocon and Gasly, with Verstappen in 10th. As the drivers ducked into the pit lane to prep for their final runs, replay showed Tsunoda being left frustrated by Verstappen being in his way, with the stewards set to investigate this latest impeding incident after qualifying. Ahead of the final runs, looking to make it out of the bottom five was Perez, Hülkenberg, Lawson, Albon and Tsunoda, who was the only driver yet to set a time. But as they set off on their final lap, Perez spun at turn one, immediately knocking him out of qualifying. In an even more surprising turn of events, it was to be two Red Bulls out of Q2, with Lawson moving up to 10th and knocking Verstappen down to 11th ahead of Lawson. It was Sainz fastest ahead of Russell, Alonso, Magnussen, Norris, Hülkenberg, Leclerc, Hamilton and Ocon. So knocked out in Q2 was Verstappen, Gasly, Perez, Albon and Tsunoda. And then in Q3, Sainz beat Russell and Leclerc to take second consecutive pole. The 10 remaining cars then made their way back out onto the track, including Leclerc, who had been briefly investigated during the interval for failing to slow under yellow flags, although the stewards found no need for further action. The drivers continued to push the limits of the Marina Bay Circuit as Sainz went to provisional pole with a time of 1 minute 31.17 seconds. Leclerc was second ahead of Norris, Russell, Hamilton, Alonso, Magnussen, Hülkenberg, Ocon and Lawson. The drivers then went back into the pit lane, strapped on a brand new set of soft tyres and went back out for their final runs. A sensational battle ensued as Sainz improved on his provisional time with a lap of 1 minute 30.984 seconds, but could anybody catch him? Each of his rivals came across the line, but nobody could beat the Spaniard, with Russell going closest, finishing just 0.072 seconds off of the Ferrari man's time. The Brit's time also put him ahead of a frustrated Leclerc in third, 0.079 seconds off his teammate's pole-setting pace. While the gap in the top three was close, Norris in fourth was nearly 3/10 off Sainz, with Hamilton half a second back of the Spaniard in fifth. Magnussen was sixth ahead of Alonso, Ocon, his Haas teammate Hulkenberg, and Lawson in 10th. Carlos Sainz said after qualifying, again, a bit like in Monza, really hitting the ground running from FP1 and feeling very confident all through the sessions and putting it together in Q3. Just focusing, not doing any mistakes in that lap, keeping it clean around here in Singapore. Normally it pays off. It was a bit of a messy session for everyone, but we kept the focus, put a good lap in, and end pole position. The 2023 Singapore Grand Prix began at 8 p.m. local time on Sunday then, and we will move to the race where Sainz held off Norris and fast-charging Mercedes pair to take sensational Singapore Grand Prix victory. Carlos Sainz converted pole into a second career victory as the Spaniard held off the charge of Lando Norris and the Mercedes pair of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, who crashed on the final lap to take a well-earned win at the Singapore Grand Prix, the first non-Red Bull winner of the season. Sainz kept a hold of the lead at the start, but with Charles Leclerc having opted to start on the softs as opposed to those around him on the mediums, the Monegasque was able to jump ahead of Russell for second. He then navigated a safety car caused by Logan Sargent crashing into the barrier to keep a hold of the lead as he later held off the challenger Russell, Norris and Hamilton. But after Esteban Ocon, who was running in sixth at the time, stopped on track with a suspected gearbox issue, Mercedes used a virtual safety car to stop their drivers for some new medium tyres, setting up a grandstand finish. But despite Russell and Hamilton getting past Leclerc, they couldn't overtake Sainz and Norris, with the Spaniard gifting his former McLaren teammate some DRS in the closing stages to hold off the Silver Arrows pair and sealing a second career win. Russell's hopes of a podium ended in the barrier at turn 10 on the final lap as he looked to get past Norris for second, allowing the McLaren driver to take his third podium of the season, while Hamilton took third. Leclerc was able to hold off the fast-charging Max Verstappen for fourth at the end, with the Red Bull driver recovering from a difficult outing that at one stage saw him being overtaken by the leading drivers for the first time this season to take fifth. Pierre Gasly was an impressive sixth for Alpine, while Oscar Piastri took seventh for McLaren. Sergio Perez ended up eighth, although he's being investigated for his part in a collision with Alex Albon. Liam Lawson scored the first points of his short F1 career for AlphaTauri as he took ninth ahead of the lead Haas of Kevin Magnussen. Alex Albon wound up 11th for Williams ahead of Alfa Romeo's Zhou Guanyu and the other Haas of Nico Hulkenberg. Both Sargent and Fernando Alonso had their fair share of incidents in the race, as the latter had a 5-second penalty, a slow pit stop, and went off track to finish last of the remaining runners behind the American rookie in 14th. Russell's crash at the end meant he, alongside Valtteri Bottas, Yuki Tsunoda, who sustained a puncture on the opening lap of the race, and Ocon didn't finish. So as it happened then, with the sun having set and the lights turned on, we were set for what was sure to be a fascinating evening in Singapore. With Sainz on pole and Verstappen and Perez outside the top 10, the paddock wondered if we would get the first non-Red Bull victory of the season. But we were two drivers short on the grid as well. Zhou was starting in the pit lane with Alfa Romeo making changes to his C43. Stroll and Aston Martin had elected to withdraw the Canadian racer from Sunday's event, with him still suffering from the effects of his hefty qualifying crash. A couple of minutes before the race start, the blankets were lifted, showing the tyres each driver had opted to use at the first stint. Plenty selected the mediums, while Leclerc, Tsunoda, Zhou and Piastri chose the softs, with the Red Bulls and Bottas on the hards. It was a brilliant start for Ferrari as the lights went out. Sainz kept a hold of the lead and his teammate Leclerc was able to jump ahead of Russell, with the Mercedes driver also losing out to his teammate Hamilton, who made his his way up from third to fifth. "Is he gonna let me pass?" exclaimed Russell on the radio after Hamilton went off track at turn 1 to gain the place. Hamilton obliged as he let Russell through on the next lap. Tsunoda's race was over as soon as it began on the first lap as he pulled over with a puncture, with replays showing a collision with Perez had caused the damage. Further back, Alonso and Ocon moved up to 6th and 7th after jumping ahead of Magnussen in the opening exchanges, with Verstappen up to 9th from P11. Alfa Romeo then made the first stop of the day, with Zhou swapping his softs for hards. While Hamilton had given the place back to Russell, Norris, who was now in 5th, was not happy either, as he also came on the radio pleading for the Mercedes driver to give the position back, which he later did. On lap 7, despite Magnussen's staunch defence, Verstappen dived down the inside of the Haas racer at turn 16 for 8th, while his Red Bull teammate Perez overtook Piastri for 13th into turn 1. At the front of the field, Leclerc was within a second of Sainz, while Verstappen was showing good race pace to close in on Ocon, who was also looking to make his way past former Alpine teammate Alonso for 6th. On lap 10, Leclerc was told to try and give a 3-second gap to Sainz out front, while the comfortable Spaniard came on the radio to say, "I could go forever at this pace," as he continued to set the fastest times of the evening. Elsewhere, Haas hadn't scored a point since Miami in May, but Magnussen and Hulkenberg were joint at the hip in 9th and 10th, respectively, while Gasly was right behind them, looking to pounce on any mistakes. "I think Carlos is slowing down," said Leclerc on the radio, with the timesheets proving his point, as Lawson in 12th matched the pace of Sainz out front. Further back, Hamilton was beginning to reel in Norris for 4th, as he set the fastest first sector on lap 14. On lap 18, Russell's engineer told him to keep the pressure on the Ferraris ahead in response to his question about what he needed to do to win the race, but then Piastri was told that there was a possibility of rain hitting the track in 5 minutes. And just as that happened, the yellow flags were waved as the cameras panned to turn 8, where Sargent had gone straight into the barrier. His front wing was now stuck underneath the FW45 as he made his way back to the pits, with pieces of carbon fibre spreading over the track as a result. That triggered the deployment of the safety car, with the top 7 drivers all deciding to dive into the pit lane for some hard tyres, with the Red Bulls electing to stay out on their old hards. This meant Verstappen was up into 2nd, with Perez in 4th. In the pit stop chaos, both Leclerc and Hamilton ended up being delayed to avoid traffic. The pair were now down in 6th and 7th, while Alonso was seen crossing the line at the pit entry, with race control investigating the incident. The order at the restart, as the safety car peeled off at the end of lap 22, was Sainz, Verstappen, Russell, Perez, Norris, Leclerc, Hamilton, Alonso, Ocon and Bottas. Magnussen was 11th ahead of Gasly, Piastri, Lawson, Hulkenberg, Albon, Zhou and Sargent. And Sainz played the restart perfectly as Russell attacked Verstappen, while Norris looked to take Perez for 4th. Behind, Leclerc looked to avoid colliding with Norris into turn 7. An incident that forced him wide, with Hamilton taking advantage to move up to 6th. Russell eventually overtook Verstappen, while Norris then got past Perez, with Hamilton now having a look at last year's Singapore Grand Prix winner. All while this was happening, Alonso was handed a 5-second penalty for crossing the line at the pit entry. On lap 24, Norris made a move past Verstappen into turn 14, while Hamilton eventually got past Perez round the outside on the exit of turn 7, although the 7-time champion went onto the curb and wide at the corner, with the Red Bull driver asking for the position back. At the front, Russell was incredibly racy as he looked to keep the pressure on Sainz for first. The Briton was within half a second of the Ferrari. Elsewhere, Hamilton was within striking distance of Verstappen for 5th. Magnussen was then shown the black and white flag for forcing Gasly off the track, right before Hamilton put his good pace and his DRS advantage to use to get past his 2021 title rival Verstappen for 5th down the inside at turn 7. The Red Bull driver was then almost immediately under pressure from Leclerc, who had earlier got past Perez. It was good news for Ferrari as Leclerc made his way past Verstappen down the inside at turn 7, while Sainz began to eke out a gap, but it was less than positive for Red Bull as Perez was now under pressure from Alonso for 7th. It's like driving on ice, complained Verstappen as he ran a lonely race in 6th out front. Russell had closed the gap to Sainz once again, while the top 4, including Norris and Hamilton, were covered by just 3 seconds. In the battle for 10th further back, Gasly was incensed by being forced off the track by Magnussen as the two drivers went wheel to wheel through turn 7 and 8, with the Dane holding on for at least another lap. However, at the same corner of the next lap, Magnussen ran off track, handing Gasly 10th, with replay showing the Haas racer going off at turn 1 and getting his tyres dirty before going off again, thus dropping him down to 16th. On lap 38, we were treated to some more excellent wheel-to-wheel action, as Perez, Alonso and Ocon had a three-way fight for 7th. The Aston Martin racer lost out to Ocon and moved up to 8th, while Perez stayed ahead as Gasly, who was now the fastest driver on track, closed in on the trio. On the next lap, Ocon showed his strong racing prowess as he forced Perez offline before making way past at turn 9. Later in the lap, Alonso and Gasly also both made their way past Perez, who boxed for the mediums immediately. Perez then came back out at the back of the field, with Verstappen also coming in a lap later for a set of the medium tyres as he came back out in 15th. The Dutch driver's pit stop pushed Piastri up to 9th and Lawson into 10th, with the AlphaTauri rookie looking for his first points finish. Back at the front of the field, Sainz was still holding on to the lead as Russell, having dropped back, began to close the gap back up. Further back, Alonso, who was now in 7th, came on the radio to call his car undrivable. But there was to be unwelcome news for Ocon and Alpine as the French driver, having been running in 6th, stopped at turn 2 with smoke coming from his A523. No, no, shouted the French driver, slamming his fist against his steering wheel as the virtual safety car was deployed. Yet there was still no movement in the pit lane apart from Albon, who came in for some mediums. Then came the Mercedes drivers as Russell and Hamilton double stacked for a set of the new medium tyres. This dropped the pair down to 4th and 5th, but importantly, it gave them clear air as they looked to chase down the top 3 of Sainz, Norris and Leclerc with 17 laps to go. But it was more bad news for Alonso as a combination of his penalty and subsequent slow stop in the pit box for softs dropped him to 15th. We were then in for a grandstand finish with Russell and Hamilton starting to close the gap to the drivers ahead as the cameras panned to Ocon walking back to the pit lane, with Alpine saying a gearbox issue was to blame for his stoppage. Things then worsened for Alonso as he went off at turn 14 and dropped to the back of the field, while Verstappen was showing a good turn of pace on his mediums, moving past Hulkenberg for 9th as he looked to rescue what had been a difficult evening. As we got to lap 50, the gap continued to close between the top 3 and the Mercedes drivers as Russell and Hamilton set the timesheets alight with green and purple sectors. Elsewhere, Lawson, who was running in 8th, was now coming under pressure from Verstappen. The stewards then revealed that they will be investigating a possible VSC infringement by Perez and Albon after the race, as the timesheet showed that while Russell was closing in on Leclerc, his teammate Hamilton was even quicker. By lap 53, Russell and Hamilton were right on the back of Leclerc as the leading Mercedes made his way past the Ferrari driver at turn 14. Hamilton then overtook them on the gas ground the outside at turn 7 on the next lap, with Norris next on the list. Verstappen was also enjoying his end to the race as he was now up to 7th after overtaking Piastri, while Bottas's race ended with a hydraulics issue. Back at the front, Sainz was asking his team for information on the gap to Norris as Russell and Hamilton continued to close in. Russell and Hamilton were then struggling to get past Norris, who was being strategically offered some DRS to help by Sainz to him stay ahead of the Mercedes pair. But as we got to the final lap, we were given one last dramatic moment as Russell, looking to get past Norris, clipped the barrier on the entry to turn 10 and went straight into the wall. That gifted Hamilton 3rd, while Sainz held on for victory. Norris wound second, while Leclerc held off the pacey Verstappen to take fourth, with the championship leader recovering to finish fifth, his first time off the podium this season. Gasly was sixth ahead of Piastri, Perez, Lawson and Magnussen after the stewards decided there was no further investigation necessary for an incident between Perez and Lawson. Outside of the points was Albon, Joel, Hulkenberg, Sargent and Alonso, as Russell's crash left him joint with Bottas, Ocon and Tsunoda as the four drivers unable to finish the race. Sainz said after the race, an incredible feeling, an incredible weekend. I want to thank everyone at Ferrari for making this huge effort to turn around and manage to win this season after a tricky beginning. But now we nailed the weekend, we nailed the race, everything that we had to do, we did perfect and we brought home a P1 that I'm sure all Italy, all Ferrari is going to be proud and happy today. The drivers now get a few days off before the next tour of the F1 calendar reaches Suzuka for the 2023 Japanese Grand Prix, which takes place between the 22nd and 24th of September. So that is it for this video then. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel. Hit the Apex F1 channel and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care.